All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session. This session is going to be centered around business and innovation for the post-COVID era. And today we get 5 speakers, and we will talk about the innovation potential of energy sector and intersection. The close attention will be devoted to energy sector and its potential innovation. Apparently, and we have 5 speakers today. And each speaker, they will talk about their work within 15 minutes, and then we will have 5 minutes for Q&A from the audience. And if you have any questions, feel free to just put your questions into the chat box for Q&A. And after everyone presents, we will also have additional Q&A for questions from the audience. And while the presenter is presenting, please keep the camera on. And as a presenter or moderator, we keep the camera off. So that's the logistics for today, and look forward to discussion. So the first speaker we have today is Afnan Hannan. He's the CEO and co-founder of Okra Solar. So in the session, he will share some experience around how they manage to deploy their IoT networks over the last 2 years in remote villages, and they will also discuss how Okra intends on working on utility companies around the world to scale their solution. So, Afnan, the floor is yours.
Cool, thanks, Elvis. Let me just share my screen and jump in. Cool, hey, everybody. Yeah, excited to see you guys and be on the panel with you. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Is that all good now?
Good. Looks great.
Okay, wonderful, cool. Well, yeah, I'll just share a little bit around what we're doing as a technology company in the space of clean energy and energy access. So as you can see over here, we're a hardware and software technology company. And the challenge that we're addressing, along with a number of other players in this space, is that, you know, amongst the backdrop of like war and the pandemic and a lot of challenging things happening in the world, there's still 760 million people who don't even have access to electricity. And so these people are often using like kerosene or shipping diesel out to communities where you can't even access by a road, and using that to get access to a bit of lighting for a few hours at nighttime. So that's a really big problem, but it's also a pretty large opportunity. It's cited that it will cost approximately $350 billion to energize these off-grid people using traditional energy sources. However, a lot of studies have shown that it's actually much more cost-effective to energize these communities with off-grid technologies. And if we look specifically at what we're doing as a tech company, if we look at Nigeria, we see it as a $4 billion market opportunity for our technology, Nigeria alone. So I'll explain a little bit more, just to give you some interesting context. This is data from Electrify Now. They've done some work to map off-grid sites and households across the world. What we're looking at is Nigeria. And we can see on the right-hand side, the number of communities with more than 1,000 households. So there's still a lot. There's approximately 5 million people who are living in communities with more than 1,000 households and are living off grid. But on the left-hand side, we can see the number of communities with less than 1,000 households. And actually, the vast majority of off-grid communities, so communities that don't have electricity, are in communities that are sparsely populated and less attractive for the electricity grid to come out to. So how are these communities going to get energized? So that's what we're addressing with our technology. As you can see here, good news for all of us is that over the last decade, the cost of solar and batteries have reduced by more than 70%. And about not every single person, but the vast majority of humans right now, and soon to be every person, will be in the range of 2G plus internet connectivity, which means we can deploy smart devices anywhere in the world. So given the lower or the reducing cost of solar and the increased availability of IoT, we've seen some technologies start to kind of penetrate the off-grid market. Minigrids, what you see here, they're great because they provide reliable power and they provide high power for productive load use, such as water pumping, refrigeration, electric cooking, milling, all of the things the community needs to really rise up through the economic ladder, so to speak. The challenge with mini-grids, though, is that when you set it up, you still need to get distribution line out to these sparsely populated communities. And that actually costs a lot of money, 50% or sometimes even more of the cost of a mini-grid, especially in sparsely populated communities, is distribution costs. You also need skilled labor to install and operate these systems. On the other side, you've got solar home systems. They're flexible and quick to install. You can see one over here. Problem is, it's not really going to provide that reliable and high power energy consumption that the community needs to really become economically productive. And yeah, that's been one of the challenges of distributed energy. So where we come in as a technology company is we've deployed a technology that allows mesh grids to set up. So basically it combines the flexibility of standalone solar home systems that can be installed at any household in a plug and play way. But if the houses are close to each other, these systems can be interconnected into smart mesh grids, giving the power utility for productive use and for reliable energy consumption that you get from a mini grid. This is basically how it works. Solar panels and batteries are installed at the house, and this is the IoT device. It can work because of connectivity to the internet, and basically it will take excess power from one system when it's available and share it through the shortest distance to the nearest system that actually requires it. And it's fully modular. You can add more houses and more capacity over time. One of the key points is because you're only sending the excess power a short distance as opposed to across an entire community, the conductor sizes that you need are about 10% of the size of a traditional mini grid. And this is reducing the cost, actually less than 10%, about 5%, but it's reducing the cost of distribution by more than 90% compared to traditional mini grids, while still getting that same power utility. And then our IoT devices also enable mobile money and revenue collection, so that energy companies don't have to physically go to the field to collect money from the systems that they install. Assets are monitored in real time using our software platform and are controlled remotely as well. All of this is reducing the operations and maintenance costs, ultimately making it profitable for energy utilities to go out to these last mile communities, all of those communities that are highlighted, that are sparsely populated, and actually provide energy to them in a way that will enable the utilities to run a profitable and sustainable business. So Nigeria is probably an interesting market to highlight. Like I mentioned, like we've got a lot of bad things happening in the world, but at the same time, we've got a lot of promising traction happening, particularly in off-grid energy. So there's a $550 million fund, which is created with the World Bank and the African Development Bank, and it's subsidizing off-grid energy solutions. And this is really exciting, and Okra is one of the technologies that are being subsidized. And this is encouraging local energy companies to actually roll out more off-grid connections, get power to these communities faster in a more reliable and sustainable way compared to traditional grid extension, and do it using renewable energy. So these are a number of our customers, and we're really looking to continue scaling in this market. And I think it's just really exciting to see the funding and the local companies and the technology that's enabled through internet connectivity and reduced cost of solar to actually enable these communities to be connected profitably. So far we've got more than 5,000 people who are getting access to energy from our technology solution, and this is offsetting CO2 and ultimately unlocking opportunities in these communities and allowing them to work late at night if they need to, have their kids study, obviously electric cooking, refrigeration, all the things that we take for granted, but saves time for them and allows them to figure out how to contribute more effectively to the modern economy. So yeah, that's a bit about what we're doing with our technology in energy access.
All right, thanks, Afnan, for the nice presentation. Do we have any questions from the audience or the other panelists? Feel free to ask any question, either through chat box or open your camera if you want to speak directly.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. It's long to keep the dialogue or start the dialogue going. In the villages where you're providing services today, maybe two questions. One, is there competition in the villages? And then secondly, how do you address affordability for the customers?
Yeah, great question. Was that Doug? That was Doug, right? Yeah, cool. So it depends on where you're operating. So if you're looking at a market like Nigeria, where there's 80 million people that don't have access to electricity, basically you've got solar home system companies who are just going all over the place and trying to distribute their products on a pay-as-you-go basis. And if you're a solar home system company, you might find a bit of competition, but typically there's, you know, a form of collaboration where it's like, all right, if you're going to go to one state or one part of the state, a different company will go to a different part of the state or a different area, and that's simply because the market is so large. Those are the people who are actually going to acquire customers. Then there's shop fronts, and obviously they're all kind of competing against each other. The lowest price and best kind of warranty will win. But when you're looking at like mini grids and mesh grids, it's a little bit different because you can look at it kind of like a monopoly market where if someone deploys a mini grid, no one else is going to come and deploy another mini grid on top of that mini grid. As far as I understand, we're not the distribution company. We work with the local developers, but they will be racing to go out to the communities, presenting their offer, their tariff, and then signing that agreement with the community. And once they've got that agreement, they would develop that project and wouldn't have competition. So the competition to kind of, I guess from a economic standpoint, how do we make sure the end customer doesn't get screwed over? Well, the competition happens before the tariffs are locked in, because multiple developers would go out to that community, and the community can choose which service provider they want to take that infrastructure project from. So hopefully that answered your question. I'm sure Will from Husk will have a bunch to add later on as well. What was the second part of the question? Sorry about that. Oh, affordability. Okay, cool. Yeah, so the crazy thing is we're looking at communities who are spending anywhere between like $4 and $25 a month on diesel and kerosene fuel before these mini grids and mesh grids come out there. And they're spending that on literally like 3 to 6 hours of unreliable power, mainly for lighting and fans at nighttime. And so when a company goes out there and is setting up a mini grid and is like, you can have, or a mesh grid, and is like, you can have 24/7 energy with a mesh grid, with the subsidy program that's already deployed in Nigeria, you're looking at customer paying an average monthly fee of $7 a month, and being able to use about 400 watt hours of energy, which is enough for lighting, fans, television, even a small refrigerator on average, which means some households are able to use a whole lot more, 24/7, and they have to pay $7 a month, and that is netting about 12 to like 12 to high teens IRR for the energy developers over a 10-year period. So it just makes sense to get distributed energy out there versus what they were using before. And I just finished that last bit by saying the price of diesel in Nigeria has actually increased between 2 to 3 times over the last 2 years because of supply chain shortages and a bunch of global issues that are happening. So it's becoming even more kind of economically no-brainer to use these decentralized energy sources.
I also have a question. So you mentioned the comparison between MiniGrid and the MeshGrid that you are developing. So for MiniGrid, available slides shows 50% of the cost are from distribution. And for MeshGrid, you have the potential to reduce 90% in distribution cost. So if you do the math here, that means you only have 5% of your whole cost from distribution. Is that math correct? Because 50% times 90% reduction. So you only have 5% for the distribution cost. That's really amazing. So I just wanted to confirm the math with you. And also, would you be able to talk about the remaining 90% of the cost, where do they come from, and what is the pathway to further reduce that?
Yeah, for sure. So some good, quick MIT maths there, nice work. But basically, like I'm looking at a site right now, and it's a $140,000 capex site, and we're looking at, yeah, I can just share my screen. Actually, it'll take me like 2 secs. Pretty cool. But if we're looking at a $140,000 capex site, we're looking at the distribution costs here being about $10,500. So yeah, between 5 to 10% there. And then the rest of the cost, a lot of it, the majority is actually coming in battery storage, inverters, and panels, basically. And the difference is, like, if this was a centralized mini grid, like, you would actually connect all the way from here to here. Like, that would be one centralized grid. And that means you've got power traveling a long distance, which means you need to bump up the voltage and use thicker conductors to minimize that power loss. Whereas with the mesh grid, you just install clusters if the houses are close to each other. Otherwise, you install them as like standalone. So that's where that distribution cost saving is coming from. I will be fully transparent, though, that with the mini grid, the added benefit is you can push, as much power as you need. So if there's one load that's using like 100 kilowatts or 200 kilowatts, because you've got the thick conductors and the high voltages, you can, in theory, pull that out of the centralized mini grid. So centralized mini grid is really good where you have a very high power commercial load, whereas the mesh grid is, even though it is an interconnected system, you can output much more power than a normal solar home system. The cables are a mesh. So if you try to pump like a lot of power in any point, then those cables, because they're much thinner, they will not be able to transport all of that power. So the mesh grids basically work when you're using residential productive load, all the way up to like pumping, refrigeration, milling. But if you're using like a really, really high power commercial load, like you've got a factory next to the village, then your traditional mini grid is actually a better solution.
Yeah, thanks again for the Q&A and for the nice presentation. Is there any more questions from anyone else in the audience or the panelists? So if not, we can thanks Afnan again for the presentation and we'll move on to the next speaker. So next up, we have Jusic, the senior banker from European Bank for Construction and Development, which is EBRD in short. And he will talk about what the bank is doing and go over the innovation through digital transition, and how we accelerate digital transition and the transfer of knowledge from advanced economies to economies in transition. So, Alice, the floor is yours.
Hey everyone. Well, first of all, I'll try to keep it much briefer than Afnan. I also feel completely out of place following Afnan on this. I don't generate the exciting and innovative ideas in a way that Afnan's company does. I represent sort of an institution that is, I hope, to some extent, a facilitator of people like Afnan and similar companies. We're both a direct investor via equity and debt, predominantly debt. Just briefly, who European and Bank for Reconstruction and Development is. We're a bank that was established in '91. You know, it's actually a very current, I suppose, topic at the sort of fall of Berlin Wall and this integration of the Soviet Union at the time. And we are a bank that is essentially playing a role of transitioning the centralized government, centralized economies led largely by governments into sort of market-driven economies. We are in 37 maybe countries right now, though we call them countries of operation. We're spread across Central Eastern Europe. That was our sort of core, sort of where we started off, and CIS countries in the Asian countries that have emerged from the Soviet Union. And now we are also in North Africa, and there continue to be talks about us potentially absorbing some more countries under our remit. Yeah, I mean, I don't have sort of direct creative ideas to bring to the fore in a way that Afnan does. I mean, what I wanted to speak of is that what we are all about is actually promoting private sector involvement. It's essentially the main reason why we were established. We're talking to the governments and on a regular basis, especially in the energy sector, which is what I cover. I'm part of the senior team for Energy Europe, and sort of, at least in my case, the European area is the remit, and we do that by, you know, continue, you know, talking to governments about creating regulatory frameworks that are, you know, and administrative setups that are conducive to private sector involvement, removing barriers to entry, removing barriers to administrative barriers for people like, you know, Okra Solar and similar, and directly investing ultimately into these projects across the energy value chain, whether that's distribution grids, transmission grids, generation assets, and so on and so forth. We're all about green, very much so these days. You know, 50% of our business volume, according to our latest capital framework that runs until 25, is meant to involve completely green assets or investments, and a major pillar of that actually capital framework is the digitalization of the economies in which we work. I think, sort of we approach that with some level of trepidation in sort of, at least in the economies where we are active. There's huge amount of still physical that needs to be done, and in order to sort of accommodate some more innovative solutions in terms of what people are doing in other more evolved markets. When it comes to grids, when it comes to digitalizing, the generation assets, digitalizing the platforms via which these assets and grids interact, and so on and so forth. In most of our countries, there is still a need to actually just physically make sure that that the system is adequate enough. But obviously, whilst doing that we promote very much sort of the newest solutions. However, most often in the countries where we are, the sort of completely innovative solutions might be cost prohibitive for those countries at that point in time. And what is an important pillar of our engagement as well is actually sourcing from EU and other donors funds that are essentially free in nature to sort of maybe mobilize some of those more innovative things or investments that would otherwise be sort of economically not viable in that particular country context. I need to remind myself, sorry, I didn't really prepare a presentation, or did I know one was expected of me, but just looking at my bullets of whether I wanted to sort of mention anything else. That's it. Perhaps I leave it at that. We're an investor, we're a bank. We really are there to facilitate people like Okra Solar in the countries where we operate, and happy to sort of answer any questions related to that.
All right, thanks, Alice, for the presentation. And do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I'll pop in again, if I may. This is Doug Arent. So has the current war in Ukraine impacted your strategy and your outlook for European investments?
Perhaps the sentence is accelerated our sort of thought process. We hope that sort of it even accelerates the agenda and it enables us to promote green and innovation with stronger arguments that were not necessarily, that the authorities in the countries where we are were not necessarily receptive to in the past, but due to sort of immediate scarcity of resource, especially specifically to the energy sector. Let's talk about energy sector. And immediate concerns of security of supply and so on and so forth. We believe that the green and innovation agenda can be brought to the fore even more than we were able to sort of convince the counterparties in that context before. Of course, it's not straightforward. Things just can't happen overnight. What parties continue to be concerned about is also how do they manage this system, and I think that's where innovation will and has to play a major role, and that's why we're trying to convince them of going in down certain innovative paths, because the conventional wisdom or the conventional solutions to managing the grid and managing is no longer going to be available in the way it was most likely. So yeah, I mean, of course, remains to be seen. We're dealing with the aftermath. We're very much involved with the crisis. In the crisis, we're a bank that sort of exists because of the crisis in a way, or as well. So.
Maybe just to clarify, because I've worked, and my colleagues have worked with your colleagues at the EBRD for a long period of time, and welcome that collaboration. Most of that is around kind of advanced clean energy planning for countries of interest for you. But you lend in a broad portfolio. It'd be good for at least this audience, I think, to understand kind of how you operate. I mean, you not only lend to countries, but also to companies or into projects, if I understand correctly. At the operation level, how do people access the money? And what are you looking for in terms of returns? Okra just talked about, 12 to 15% IRRs on their projects. Is that attractive for you all?
Well, we're an institution that operates on a sustainable basis, right? So we'll want to sort of attain returns that the private sector would want to attain in a particular investment, whether it's a debt investment or an equity investment. Having said that, we're an institution that exists to take greater risk than a usual institution would, precisely because it sort of creates that market, and then others eventually we need to convince ourselves that that project has a role to play in sort of creating other projects of similar nature that will welcome different type of capital following us sort of initiating that type of investment or involvement. So those are the sort of the pillars we need to defend institution in front of our board and institutionally, is like how does this project transition the country, in which way does it help? But effectively, really, anything is game, everything is game. What distinguishes us to some extent from other institutions, that we actually finance, as you rightly said, Doug, across the board. So we're involved on the sovereign side as well as on the private side. But really, fundamentally, our role is to become almost exclusively private. We want to accelerate everything towards private and market-driven economies, and liberalization of the markets, and unbundling of incumbents, and that's kind of the things we aspire to create greatest possible efficiencies within each country context. And everybody can approach us directly. Most of our contact details and things are accessible publicly. And we do certainly participate in things like this to let people know that we're available. It's very clear on our website as well which are the countries where we operate. We cannot invest in countries that we do not operate in, which are not countries of operation. So specifically, there's 37 of them right now, I think 38. I keep losing count. And those are the countries in which we can invest either equity, debt, anything in between. We're quite flexible in that sense.
Thank you.
I have a quick follow-up question, Alice. So you mentioned the key for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is to promote private sector involvement. And since the topic for today's post-COVID summit, and how do you see the impact of the COVID-19 affect the model for investment? How do you see it's going to affect it in the future models? So just could you just give some comment to how the COVID plays in this role?
I mean, it's a very big question. Let's see. I mean, I think there are questions amongst authorities and investors alike, like about, reliance on the supply channels, on that are both affected now by, these crises that have followed each other. So, we've had COVID and immediately this war and this atrocity that is happening very close to Europe. Well, it's in Europe, certainly very, very close to us, very close to where we operate. That's what I meant to say. So I don't know. I hope it doesn't sort of, I hope it accelerates sort of the innovative thinking, but at the same time does not prevent interconnectivity and countries relying on each other to sort of provide the missing element in each respective country, rather than countries sort of reverting to some sort of hoarding of ideas, investment, and so on and so forth amongst themselves. I asked a similar question to our chief economist not so long ago when we had a presentation of how the war affects, in a broad sense, many things, and sort of got to, an inconclusive answer myself on that. So yeah, let's see. I mean, our role is really to sort of try and promote, certainly, in innovation, and we definitely continue to promote sort of reliance on each other and interconnectivity between systems and in our regions where we're active.
All right, thanks. I do have a quick follow-up. So regarding the model right now, it focuses more on private sector, and so what do you think the role of academic institutions, such as the universities, they can play, and what do you think? So have there already been some existing work that you are doing in addition to the partnership with the private sector?
So you said academic institutions?
Correct. Yeah, academic institutions.
I'm afraid there, like obviously sporadically EBRD will have some sort of initiative connected to, with work with an academic institution, but it's not sort of an area where we have capacity to get involved too close into, in our energy sector, where academic institutions are involved, we actively sort of involve consultants and views from the academic world into discussions that we're having with the authorities. So whether it's what regulatory amendments are adequate to make, what are the other countries doing, how does it compare, and obviously academic world has a big role to play in sort of facilitating that dialogue and helping us inform the authorities on things to consider and things to take forward and things like that. But in general, I mean, if you ask me personally, academic world has a huge role to play, and especially in like countries of Asia where we are, in terms of that transfer of knowledge and ideally, universities and schools from, lesser developed economies would be evolving and continuing to be supported to evolve their relationship with universities from the West, let's say, in sort of transferring the knowledge between those institutions and stuff. I find that, I need to sort of think whether I'm going to offend anyone by remarks, but, I find that sort of still in a lot of our countries' operation, academics have quite a long way of sort of moving towards the way things are delivered and thought through in the West, especially in institutions like MIT, So there's a huge gap towards that. In some sort of some of the approaches are still sort of very much sort of rudimentary, I would say, compared to how things are done in the more evolved economies.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for answering. And do we have any more questions for Alice? So if not, let's thank Alice again for the presentation, and let's move out to our next speaker. So up next is Douglas Arent, the Deputy Associate Lab Director at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And in the presentation, we talk about the current strategic approaches to innovation in the 21st century and describe the key strategic areas of rapid innovation in energy ecosystems that are needed to achieve local and global ambitions. So, Doug, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to show slides today, so bear with me as I kind of walk through just a verbal discussion on this front. So let me start with the basics. So NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, is a national laboratory in the United States. It was founded in 1976 as the Solar Energy Research Institute during the first oil crisis. Changed to a national lab in 1991, and we are one of 17 of the U.S. national laboratories. We focus solely on energy efficiency and clean energy, renewable energy technologies, innovating them and working with partners to get those innovations to scale commercially in the marketplace, which is a very core piece. So we're not a fundamental research organization. Some of the national labs were founded to do basic science. Others are founded to support national security. There are 3 only that focus on applied energy. Ourselves on the clean energy side, colleagues at Idaho National Lab, which focus on civilian nuclear, and colleagues at what's called the National Energy Technology Laboratory, which focus on carbon management and fossil energy. Just to give you a sense, we have about 3,000 employees. About half of those, slightly over half of those, are masters and PhDs. We do core innovations from, if you're familiar with the technology readiness level, ideas from kind of technology readiness level, maybe 2 or 3, all the way up through 9. And with a pretty heavy emphasis on 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which means it's really around applied ideas and applied areas. We also, and I have led for more than 20 years, our Strategic Energy Analysis Division, which develops best-in-class data analytics and tools. This covers everything from energy economic modeling, very high power system modeling, integrated systems modeling. I think we were the first company to have created a hybrid energy system design optimization tool. It was run out of NREL for many years, called Homer, and now was spun out and it's run commercially these days. We then work also globally. So while we're based in the United States, we have fairly deep programs in about 40 countries around the world, and active in probably more than 90. Total business volume, so total revenue, if you were to look at it from a company perspective, is about $650 million a year right now, fairly rapidly growing. And we're looking for about 500 new hires this year, if you know folks who are interested in coming and joining a real innovation engine on that front. So let me spend just a couple minutes talking about how we see the landscape and where we're focusing our innovation strategy on, and then how we also then work with others to do that. So as we've evolved, and if you want to look, if you've got time online while I'm talking, it's nrel.gov. While it's got a .gov in the background, we should know as a national laboratory, we're actually operated by a 501c3 nonprofit. So that's a nonprofit research institution in the United States. on behalf of the United States government. Of that 650 million, about 80% of it is coming from government funding, and 20% of it comes from banks, corporations, foundations, and other organizations. So a fairly diverse business model, although principally, our principal role is to support the U.S. Department of Energy and other U.S. government entities. So just back on the kind of the technology front in terms of thinking about strategy and innovation areas. There are three principal areas in our strategy. The first is integrated energy systems. Integrated energy systems is a very big bucket. Of course, part of that is focused on, and a core is on decarbonized power systems, which are essentially seen as the backbone of a decarbonized energy economy, not just electricity, but energy economy in the United States and frankly around the world. That also includes dealing with advanced cyber communications, vehicle to grid, electrification of end uses, super efficient grid interactive buildings, and of course the heterogeneity of power systems as they transition from kind of big bulky generators to very heterogeneous connection of bulk generators, distributed generation, distributed storage, very large variety of loads, and two-way power flow. So that's one big system, integrated energy systems. Even within that, while we bring expertise in renewables and energy efficiency and electric mobility, we work with colleagues, as I mentioned, in nuclear and clean fossil to be thinking about multi-input systems. So, think of systems that might combine where the politics and the economics work. Nuclear, clean renewables, storage, even fossil with carbon management, and of course, maybe other elements when they become commercial, something like direct air capture or other carbon removal technologies, as referenced in the latest IPCC report. So that's a big bucket. That's one big one. The second one is also a relatively large pool of where we see innovation and where we're focused with a lot of partners on this. And that's in what Europeans call power to X, what we call electrons to molecules. So here, think of the conversion of a clean or low carbon electron into high value chemicals and products. So a classic example for thinking through this is hydrogen, which is generated from clean electricity sources through electrolysis. CO2, which could be sourced from a biomass resource or captured from the air or captured from an effluent stream, combined together to create now low carbon hydrocarbons. So that could be renewable natural gas. It could be higher hydrocarbons that get synthesized into sustainable aviation fuel. It could be polymers, which then go into chemicals, et cetera. So essentially building up the chemical supply chain from basic molecules, which are derived from clean processes, and eventually replace the petroleum feedstocks which exist today if they are unabated. Third big stream is a circular economy, and here we focus on energy materials and the energy economy. So very significant efforts in silicon and photovoltaic recycling. And this is beyond just recycling. This is really about redesign for repurposing, reuse, redesign, and recycling. Photovoltaics, batteries, wind, all of those are principal at this stage. So here we're thinking of, what does the energy economy look like in another 25 to 50 years, where principally at that point in time, one hopes that we have extracted enough fundamental metals from the earth or the seabed or elsewhere and that those useful products are at the end of their useful life and frankly can be positively recycled, which reduces the primary extraction rate and creates a more holistic circular economy. So those are the three big buckets of how we think about our research strategy and how we're investing in processes going forward. As an organization, also, we own and operate pretty significant physical assets. This is probably also an interesting differentiator, particularly working with companies as well as other institutions, which is, you know, the principal activity of our campus is creating and working with partners to promulgate innovations in the energy space. So whether or not that's models, data, computing, et cetera, or whether or not it's actually physically creating, you know, new materials for solar cells, new processes for electrolysis or electrochemical catalytic conversion, bioreactors for creating biomethane from clean sources, et cetera. So our campus is actually relatively large. It's in Colorado. We have two major facilities focused on integrated energy systems. One is called the Energy System Integration Facility. It's a 2 megawatt configurable grid with many, many different laboratories in it that are all configurable: residential house, vehicle charging, and hydrogen and other, even put a whole household in it if you'd like to, a pre-construction household. The other one is expansion up to about a 20 megawatt, if you want to think about it at an electric load level. That's got research quality wind turbines in them, large scale solar, large scale batteries, large scale electrolyzers, other integrated energy systems as well. So it's a very big differentiator. Those are all available actually for partnering with others. So let me just spend a couple minutes just chatting a little bit about deriving that strategy, or maybe devolving it into what does that really mean for actually getting work done. So there are a couple different things in terms of how we operate. The first is that we really think about creating innovation ecosystems through partnerships. This has a very critical perspective on how to work with others and how to think about combining the value that's brought in by working with a startup to a larger company, to an investor, maybe to a stakeholder who's willing and interested to pilot that technology at first scale and or to de-risk it in the laboratory and then scale it out. So on that front, we license for de minimis terms any intellectual property that we create. So that's available for use and expansion of that. We've created an IP portal, not only into NREL, but into the broader national lab complex. Through that, as I said, we also have about $150 million worth of work with partners. So this is through 900 commercial partnerships, domestically and globally. And then we have 3 or 4 different particular strategic initiatives to accelerate innovation in the marketplace. So working with smaller companies that are trying to create, I would call it digitally enabled solutions, much like we've already heard this morning and we'll hear later. So the first is a partnership that's almost 10 years old now. It's called the Innovation Incubator. We launched this with Wells Fargo Foundation and have put through a number of different cohort companies. And the idea behind this one, very similar to a second one, which we launched more recently called the Shell Game Changer, and a third one, which we've launched, which is called the Chevron Studio. All of them have the same basic model, which is those companies, whether or not it's from a foundation or from an investment pool, fund NREL to run a program to work with innovators to de-risk technologies. So innovative small companies, let's say they're just at the bench scale and not quite at commercial, apply or are invited, if we know them, through a very large network of technology incubators around the country, and frankly around the world, into a competition that go through a selection committee by the sponsors and a technical committee by NREL. If awarded, they get about $250,000 worth of non-dilutive technical assistance, including putting their machinery and or software in our controlled laboratories, engineering support for them, and basically get their technology de-risked. At the back end of that, depending upon the structure of the innovation ecosystem, they're actually guaranteed, or at least get easy access to, a first commercial application, or certainly less than n equal 10 commercial applications, where we then also work to validate the performance of those technical solutions in the marketplace. So this has happened now, as I said, for more than 10 years. The companies that go in, classically innovative companies, fail if they're following a venture route, between 8 and 9 out of 10. We actually completely flip that calculus and find that 7 to 8 of those companies become successful because they've gone through a technology de-risking that's very rigorous and valid. And the first set of cohorts out of IN2 have raised more than $1 billion in follow-on funding. So I encourage you to look at those efforts as well. We've also done a strategic R&D partnership with some of the major companies. This is a 10-year kind of engagement. Again, pre-competitive R&D that is selected by a selection committee. And then more importantly, and lastly, and I'll stop here, is that we're really thinking and putting effort into creating a multi-sector consortia. So as you think about the energy systems, particularly in, I'll call it the developing country, the developed countries, but also in the emerging economies, as mobility converts to electric, and I think that there's going to be an even higher push on that in Europe, given the current crisis. The interaction between mobility, buildings, power, and industry are more and more critical. And many companies are just relying or expecting the power grid to work, given their new loads, et cetera. And that's not always the case. So we have to be mindful and thoughtful about how we plan power systems, how we design those, and frankly, how we operate those. And of course, there's the policy and regulatory front in that as well, in terms of how our consumers, be them industrial or individual, incented to operate their devices in the most grid-friendly manner in order to both serve their needs, but also support the decarbonization goals as well as the economics. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that was helpful for folks not familiar with NREL and thinking more broadly about the innovation landscape.
Thanks, Doug, for introducing the landscape for NREL. That's pretty insightful. I actually have a carbon utilization background during my PhD and during my postdoc. I work on carbon capture. So I'm pretty interested in the areas that NREL covered. And as I understand, carbon utilization, you mentioned CO2 to fuel conversion. There's also CO2 to polymer, CO2 to plastic, CO2 to many variety of products. And for carbon capture, there's also many pathways. Dual air capture, dual ocean capture, the traditional amine-based capture. So my question is, how does NREL decide what would be the priority areas that NREL could devote into, and especially you're from the scientific computing and energy analysis sector. How do you see that play a role in deciding what to work on? Because there's so many options.
Yeah, interesting. So it's a great paper because you're in the academic world, and I'll forward it to you separately. But some colleagues actually looked at, I'll call it molecular buildup pathways, foundry pathways from basic molecules into most of the primary chemicals which are in the chemical supply chain. and derived pathways for those coming forward. So from our perspective, we look at from a C source, a carbon source, whether or not that carbon source is a piece of biomass that's related, potential, as I mentioned, carbon dioxide, which would be captured from the air or from an effluent stream, and then what to do with it. So our principal research is not in the capture side of it. It could be in the biomass sourcing side of it. That's true. But the CO2 capture side is our colleagues at the National Energy Technology Lab. So we partner with them. And so then now we say, okay, if we can find a carbon molecule and figure out how to make it into a useful state in a low energy, reliable pathway, how do we use that into creating, frankly, low carbon supply chains for fuels and chemicals? So when we have a very heavy thrust in sustainable aviation fuels, Alder is one of our big partners. LanzaTech is one of our big partners. So these are the companies that have created sustainable aviation fuels at scale enough that airlines are committed to, many billions of gallons per year from them, and are frankly flying on their fuels already. So that technology has derived out of our laboratory and some of the innovations that we've done. Similarly, we're looking at biomethane creation through a synthetic reaction, again, using clean hydrogen and CO2 captured either from the air or from an effluent. That's, again, it's basically oriented toward a replacement of anthropogenic natural gas, so that we can think about, sustaining the use of the natural gas. Two examples. Oh, I've
frozen.
I may have lost. Yeah.
Doug, I think you were frozen for a bit.
Yeah, I'm going to turn my video off and just see if I can get the audio work. Go ahead.
Okay, so the focus for NREL is not on the capture side; it's on the utilization side. So is that what you were trying to say? I think we lost Douglas.
He's gone.
Yeah, he's trying to rejoin probably.
I think you should keep going, Elvis.
Okay. Anyway, so I think let's move on to our next presenter, and is by Elvira Prados, and she's the head of CEO Office of Energy of ACCIONA, and so in her presentation, she will talk about how the energy sector's opportunities have multiplied, also the challenges and the need to accelerate the development of new technologies underpinned by the renewables in the context where the overall demand of energy and electrification is set to increase. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elvis. Yeah, indeed, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic was a catalyst for green solutions. The post-pandemic recovery and the current energy crunch situation will rely on how governments and in the international community make the required structural transformation. And in this context, the energy sector's opportunities have multiplied, also the challenges, of course, but it's clear the need to accelerate the deployment of new clean technologies. I work for ACCIONA Energía. It's one of the few utilities that can be proud of having a 100% renewable energy portfolio since its creation 30 years ago. And as we were born renewable, we now do not have to make a transition like other utilities. And just thinking of the many clear opportunities we have ahead, we have already 11 gigawatts of renewables all over the world in 17 countries in 6 technologies: onshore wind, solar PV, CSP, biomass, hydro, and battery storage. Because of this, we will continue the multi-technological approach. We believe in diversification of revenue. So to continue growing in installed capacity, of course, because last year we went public, and the main reason was to back up accelerated growth, and our aim is to double in size by 2025. And we will also bet for adjacent technologies and services to be with the aim to be a complete decarbonization ally. The idea is backed by one reason: is the path to full decarbonization follow three key vectors. One is renewable at the core of the new energy system. Two is electrification for easy to abate emissions, and three, there is a full range of possibilities for hard to abate emissions, but we do believe in the potential of green hydrogen. That's why we are also very strong on it. We will try to be the company of the future due to our characteristics. We are looking for opportunities in high growth sectors, as I said, green hydrogen. We already produced the first molecules of green hydrogen for industrial use in Spain. The inauguration was 1 month ago in Mallorca, and we have also established with a JV with Plug Power, a US electrolyzer manufacturer, because in the green hydrogen landscape right now, supply chain alliances between manufacturers and companies are of essence. We are going to create a platform to invest in Spain and Portugal, and developing two different approaches: centralized plants like hydrogen valleys and on-site projects. Our scope goes beyond Spain and Portugal. We are also making progress in Chile, where we already have obtained funds to build a project of green hydrogen. And the most important thing in green hydrogen is getting the demand. That's why we start by small projects that once demand start growing, we will escalate. And this is happening in Chile. For our 10 megawatts project, we already have MOUs that cover 70% of the uptake of the production. And we are also recently signed an MOU to supply clean energy to a green hydrogen plant in Queensland. Plans in green hydrogen are bullish. Green hydrogen is really a solution for hard to abate sectors, and it's efficient. So that's why we really believe that it finally will develop. We are also, in terms of innovation, we are also exploring the development of new generation offshore floating structure. Floating offshore wind is a niche market that has not a clear technological winner yet. And we are also developing in our infrastructure branch in the company, has signed a partnership also to create energy islands in the niche North Sea to facilitate offshore wind interconnection. In energy services, we also believe a lot in energy efficiency. It's better to not consume or to electrify that to create emissions without a stop and then trying to put a solution in the problem. The first thing is the lower hanging fruit, that is energy efficiency and electrification. In this escape, in the energy services business line, the company is generating savings for their clients through LED projects, etc., monitoring and optimizing their consumption. Each year, we have many projects around the world. We just won the largest energy services contract tendered in Spain. It's very important for us. It's a very interesting business line. It's also capable of providing flexible digital services with market aggregation, and we are advancing in that landscape to be prepared when the figure of a demand aggregator really comes real. Then EV charging, of course, that's gonna be a huge opportunity in the future. We just acquired an independent company here in Spain for the installation and management of intercity chargers. and we will grow in that landscape. It will also be helpful to manage our electricity through vehicle to grid, etc. So the innovation landscape in that sense is also booming. In terms of storage, every year we open a call for proposals to go beyond lithium-ion, and we are piloting those technologies that are different from lithium-ion, because there's, as it happens in other sectors, there are also landscape to have more technologies than just one, especially in long-term duration storage. So in any case, we were pioneers in lithium-ion in 2012, and then in 2017 we were the first company in Spain to have grid-connected storage with a wind farm and also with a PV solar plant. We have a strong pipeline of lithium-ion storage. However, in several wholesale markets, there are not enough market price signals to create a business case. So for sure it will develop, but it depends a lot on how regulators decide to design it. We also bet for hybridization, leveraging on the large wind fleet we have. It's creating high value dispatchable energy and optimizing the grid access. So we are also betting for hybridization as a way of accelerating deployment of renewables. And in terms of very, very innovative focus activities, we have many initiatives in life extension of our wind farms, in innovative technologies to optimize the production curve, advanced O&M technologies like blade cleaning with robots, solar PV dry cleaning, IoT for hydroelectric plants, robotics for biomass, advanced floating PV solutions. Then some other areas that are really interesting right now is the innovation to ESG, that is protecting biodiversity through innovation with wildlife protection, fire detection, etc. Blockchain is also helping us in digital innovation to track the 100% reliability of our electricity. And finally, there is the waste to industry. As we have biomass, for us it's very important to use the slag and ashes generated to use it in economy, circular economy initiatives like agricultural fertilizer, the recovery of degraded soils, etc. So and of course, in terms of circular economy, we are also piloting second life batteries of second-hand Nissan EV batteries in the north of Spain. So we are prepared also to when a lot of second life batteries will need to find a second use. So there are multiple technological optionalities in the current landscape, and we will and we want to be part of the technological progress. It's amazing, and I think we are lucky to work in the energy environment right now. So thank you for listening, and if you have any question.
Is there any questions from audience or the panelists? If not, I can start by asking one to kick off the discussion. So you mentioned about green hydrogen, and I'm not in. So first to clarify, I'm not in the green hydrogen field, but I just keep hearing the different colors of hydrogen: green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, the gray hydrogen, and we'll be able to explain what is the differences. And also, hydrogen has been a hot topic for many years. But I just recognized last year, MIT Technology Review listed green hydrogen as the 10 revolutionary technologies. What's the reason that you say green hydrogen is popular again? So these are two questions.
Europe was a catalyzer for green hydrogen. We are realizing finally that we were dependent on resources we do not have, and green hydrogen is a great substitute for those resources. So So the push of Europe that they saw green hydrogen as a resort to escape from dependency. I think it has everything to do with it. China, of course, was also working on it because they as well, they don't want to be dependent on the fossil resources of others. So so that is why, and that's my opinion, and I think it has to do with that, and also with finding new opportunities of jobs creation, finding new high growth industry that can help the COVID-19 recovery. So that was a game changer, and the hype, it started like a hype, and it's still a hype because of many news around the world of 3 gigawatts projects, etc. But indeed, I think the moment has arrived, because they are putting a lot of money right now, governments, into innovation funds, etc., that go directly to green hydrogen, and there is a learning curve already, and that doesn't happen with many other technologies. So I'm referring to electrolyzers. So I think the moment has arrived.
All right, thanks. Is there any other questions from any of the panelists? Okay, so let's thank Elvira again for the presentation. If there are no additional questions, we'll move on to our next speaker. So next up, we have William Brent, and he's the Chief Campaign Officer, Power for All. So in the presentation, we talk about how it is crucial to have more evolved finance policy and regulatory frameworks, and recognize the importance of private sector solar and mini grid companies. So William, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Elvis, and thanks to all the other speakers. Just as a correction, I used to be the Chief Campaign Officer at Power for All. I'm now the Chief Marketing Officer at a company, MiniGrid company called Husk Power Systems. I'm going to keep my comments very short and keep the promotional side of my comments even shorter. Just briefly, Husk Power was founded in 2008. We're the leading rural mini-grid owner and developer. We have about a fleet of 150 mini-grids that we've built in India, Nigeria, and Tanzania over the past 10 years. Those are all solar hybrid systems that are also including batteries and backup, and we also integrate in a waste biomass gasifier for communities where the demand is high enough. And when you bring all three together, solar plus biomass plus batteries, you create a fully 24/7, 100% renewable system, which is a unique feature of our business model. We have very ambitious growth trajectory. We're at 150 plants right around now. We hope to grow 10x in the next 4 to 5 years. We also signed a UN Energy Compact earlier this year to reach 5,000 mini-grids, at least by 2030. The World Bank says the world that there are about 200,000 mini-grids needed to meet the role that they can play in ending energy poverty. So we hope to make a substantial contribution to that number. Just on the topic of post-COVID, and how we see the future based on this experience, I really want to focus my comments mostly on that. And I would say, and my thinking on this is still evolving, but I would say that there are 4 things that the private sector companies like Husk Power need to solve for in the post-COVID era. And the post-COVID era, for me is also the pre-climate change era, or the current climate change era. There's a lot of overlapping factors in the things that I'm going to talk about that apply both to COVID and the pandemic as well as to climate change. So what are the 4 things that I think that we need to solve for? One is more localization. We've seen huge supply chain disruptions in the last 2 years. Those I don't think are going to, they're only going to become more frequent, not less. Governments are recognizing this. Companies like us are recognizing this. And there needs to be a much greater amount of attention put on trying to localize supply chain as much as possible, so that disruptions like the ones that we've seen and are seeing don't impact as much as they have been. That, you know, you throw in the political uncertainty around what's happening in Ukraine, and it just increases. So that's one, localization. The second, my colleague from EBRD already talked about, which is digitalization. For a company like us to be able to scale, we knew this pre-COVID, but COVID just further exacerbated it. We need to be able to have the IoT, the machine learning tools in place within our infrastructure and our platform to be able to remotely manage our assets. If we're not able to do that, we're not going to be able to drive our costs down to become more sustainable as a business, but we're also not going to be able to withstand similar disruptions like the one that we've had from COVID. The third is decentralization. You know, you're already seeing this in many sectors, not just energy, but solutions like MiniGrids and Okra. You know, they are the wave of the future, especially as climate change increases and you see more extreme weather, drought, et cetera, affecting more centralized energy systems. The role for decentralized systems like MiniGrids will only increase. So we think we're well positioned to take advantage of that trend. And the last thing that I've made up a term is called desiloization. I've worked a lot across different sectors, public, private, civil society, finance, and you know, no matter what the size of the organization or the location of that organization, silos continue to be a huge barrier to more efficient deployment of resources and more efficient use of resources. We see it in our business, and we're looking to become a much more matrix business that brings in partners to make up for gaps that we have in our capacity. So that term, I don't think it exists, but I term it desiloization. Now, as you also mentioned, you know, comments that I had probably submitted to the organizers at the beginning of this whole process around, you know, the increased role for private sector or the public-private partnership, and the recognition with both governments and the financial community to recognize the importance of that public-private partnership. But that also gets to the whole issue of desiloization, right, and breaking down those barriers. So those are the four post-COVID issues, problems, challenges, whatever you want to call them, that I see in our future. And you know, there's going to be you know, I think a lot of innovation coming from that. It's forced us to innovate, try new things, and you know, we will continue to be looking into the future and focusing on those four issues that I mentioned to innovate further. Thanks.
Thanks, William. Is there any questions from the panelists?
I've got to just start my video. Hey, Will, thanks for the presentation there. And yeah, it's really inspiring. A lot of the players in the off-grid energy space, Okra included, have been inspired by the work of Husk and what you guys have done before us. A question that I had was, when you're talking about collaboration, talking about supply chain problems, this thought just occurred to me, but have you ever collaborated on supply chain with, you know, like quote unquote competitors in the industry to make it more resilient, and also to probably get the costs down for procuring like panels and batteries, etc. So in theory, like a lot of us, Okra included, we're dependent on the Chinese supply chain. There's alternative supply chains, but they're quite a bit more expensive. Potentially you could aggregate that procurement and get the cost back down to Chinese costs if you were willing to partner with partners. Just curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's so, I mean, Husk up until now has, you know, we faced significant flooding and other disruptions to our supply chain in India previously, and as a result, we had to diversify our supply chain. That was pre-COVID, which helped us when we got to COVID. So we've been looking at procurement and supply chain for many years, and we've gotten our costs down considerably. We've also got second source, at least, for all of the components that we use. And so, we're pretty efficient in terms of procurement. Now, I do think that bulk procurement is a really important opportunity that's still untapped. There are a couple of different initiatives, Avi, that I know about that are happening right now. There's one in Nigeria. There's another that'll be more Pan-African, I think 4 or 5 countries where different organizations are looking to bulk procure and bring down the cost. We've looked at those so far, and their costs are still higher than ours. So, I don't think, we'll look to take it. I'm sure the costs will come down as that bulk procurement starts to ramp up and gain more traction. So I think that's one thing. I think those bulk procurement initiatives are underway. But what I'm really hoping to see, to be honest, and I'm looking for ways to accelerate it, is how do you localize at least assembly, if not manufacturing? You're starting to. There's already, I think, one. You're active in Nigeria like we are. There's already one local firm that's starting to do local assembly for solar panels. But how do we really look at industrialization in sub-Saharan Africa, other parts of Southeast Asia, for the components that we're talking about, and start to make that supply chain start to grow today, right? So that we're not going to be reliant on the Chinas of the world into the future. India is definitely going to take more of a prominent role in supply chain for the energy sector in the next decade. But I'd also like to see Africa really play a significant role. So that's, I think, a really important point around localization and why I made it, because there's just not enough investment in that currently. I don't know if that, hopefully that answers your question, Afi.
Yeah, thanks for that, Will.
William, I have a question regarding decentralization. So earlier today, before the session, we talked about the dual air capture stuff, and most of the current units, they are still using centralized systems. And what we are doing at MIT is to see whether there's opportunity to capture CO2 from distributed sources. But we also see there's additional challenges when you shift that model from centralized to decentralized systems. So would you be able to share some challenges for decentralization, and what are the potential solutions to these challenges compared with centralized systems?
So for us, I mean, the challenge is that, what we do is fairly CapEx intensive. There's, fairly high upfront CapEx involved in building a mini-grid. And so for a nascent industry like the mini-grid industry, being able to access affordable long-term tenor debt to build those projects is a significant barrier. And it's starting to change. There is some more affordable debt coming into the market now. But that's one issue, right? Because in order to get to scale, you have to be able to overcome those high initial CapEx costs. We're now at a place, at a scale where we've been able to largely bring a lot of those costs down, and as a result, we have the lowest levelized cost of energy of any mini-grid company that I'm aware of, and many of the other systems in both sort of construction and operations we've optimized over the past 10 years. So I think that's definitely one issue, Elvis, that I would point to.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience or from panelists?
Probably again me. This is both, I guess, to Will and then potentially Doug afterwards, but we are an early kind of entrant, not an early entrant, that's not the right word. We're a recent entrant in supplying technology to the space. We kind of gone out from pilot and now we're starting to scale up, and we're seeing like the first set of lead acid batteries that we had deployed in our pilot projects actually come to end of life. So that was a pain in the bum, and we've moved over to LFP batteries, which have a longer lifetime, obviously, but ultimately they're going to need recycling, and these are in such hard to reach places we've kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit. We're like, okay, we're going to come up with a proper recycling plan before everything hits end of life. So just wondering whether there's any lessons that we can learn from Husk's experience, or later on maybe NREL's modeling experience for what to do in the long term about this.
Yeah, thanks, Avi. I can just respond quickly because I don't have much to say, and then Doug can chime in. I mean, we still use lead acid batteries. You know, we found that we've sort of been able to optimize the management of those batteries to the point where they can last for about 5 years, if you know, based on our current operations. And we've tried you know, different chemistries for other batteries, and we just find them much more difficult to manage on an ongoing basis. Not to mention the end of life and how to handle that. I mean, there's obviously a very robust infrastructure in place for lead acid, less so for other chemicals. So for us, it's not an issue yet, but it is going to be one for not just us, but the whole energy sector. And so I'd love to hear what Doug has to say about that.
Yeah, I'll just offer. So on the chemistry side, you know, if that's a pressing problem, I think that's something that should come to us. I think most of our work has been on, you know, on thinking about lithium and lithium recycling because it's so difficult. So not really in the traditional lead acid space. But here's the point where I think this conversation actually should go, which is that's an aggregation opportunity to create a new business, which might be you know, a partnership for you all, or might be finding somebody else who's willing to create the business and take it to the EBRD, or frankly, take it to a bunch of private investors who are seeing and want to invest in the ecosystem of the clean energy ecosystem. And so if you're seeing it as a problem, it certainly is a business opportunity, right? And so I think we need to turn that back around and say, okay, who's willing to, you know, really put some energy into that, and frankly, then money to create a business opportunity to make this happen. And I, you know, we could have an offline conversation about, I think, a number of investors, private investors, to do that. Maybe talk to our colleagues at EBRD as well as some of the development agencies. And it's been a pressing problem for the last 20 years, right? I mean, we've seen batteries thrown on the side of buildings, particularly in developing countries, for a long period of time from the early solar home system. So I think it's a good opportunity.
All right. Is there any more questions for William or for any of the speakers? Or anything anyone wants to discuss? Okay, so with that, I would like to thank the speakers again for your time and for sharing insights. So this marks the end of the innovation potential for energy sector session. And thanks all again for attending. And we look forward to keeping in touch. And take care, especially the COVID-19 is still not over.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. All right,
Thank you.
take care.
so much.
Hey, guys.
Okay.
Good work, guys. Good
Bye.
luck.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Really good to hear from all of you.
See ya. Hey, Doug, would you be able to share your email address?
Sure. It's just doug.arent@nrel.gov.
Okay, I'll be following up. All right, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.